to do something else. This is about work, it's about learning, it's about work, it's about building on what we did yesterday morning, and this is going to be very much along the same lines with the same kind of process as we did yesterday, which means for those of you who weren't here yesterday or couldn't get in the room, please note that down. It works fantastically efficiently for me as a moderator and also for you, because it allows me to know the kind of things that are on your mind. So right from the get-go, there's the network, and there's the password, and there are the addresses that you can use. Here we'll be curating it as well. Now, I'm not guaranteeing there'll be any singing today, but we will shed some light on work. Heather, would you like to show your shoes? She's the only one wearing them. I did say, well, you could have brought 3 more pairs for us. Anyway, she's got illuminated shoes, so we are literally going to shed light on work and skills, particularly with the extension of work well beyond what people keep calling retirement, whatever that means. So that's very much the area in which we want to focus between now and 11 o'clock. Now, before I tell you what we're going to focus on, let me ask each of them to introduce themselves, each of the panelists. It will be a conversation, and I want you to be involved as much as possible, but if you can use your keyboard, it would be really helpful, because that's a great way of communicating. Heather.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Heather. My last name is McGowan. I work at the intersection, I say, between the future of work and the future of learning, and I'm a consultant.
Hi, Patrick King. I run our Insights team at LinkedIn for our learning solutions business. So Insights is essentially data science.
Morning, Alan Ryan. I'm the Director of National Programs for an organisation called Health Education England, which is part of the NHS in the UK, and we're responsible for training and providing the right workforce for the NHS. And
you started life or professional life as a nurse?
I did. They don't let me do that anymore, not for bad reasons, I have to say, but that was a while ago. But I was a nurse for about 20 years.
Okay, and Patrick, just given that many people in this room, or probably many people, all people, are using LinkedIn, maybe as you speak, trying to look for new jobs and everything else, how fast is LinkedIn growing now?
We're up to about 530 million members globally, about 10 million plus in the DACH region. So we're growing pretty fast. I think it's about 2 members every minute are added to the platform, so every second. Thanks, Rolf. That's my colleague, Rolf, at second. So
let's just check we've got the data correct. Would you like to repeat that so we get it right?
2 members every second are added to the LinkedIn platform.
Okay, wow. Okay, and Heather, just one thing from your standpoint. Who do you talk to? Who are you talking to in your work?
Well, to give a plug to LinkedIn, and we didn't plan this, I wrote my first article on LinkedIn in 2014. My second article went viral, 100,000 people read it in 3 days, and I started getting speaking requests. And so who I speak to there are people all over the world, and there are a number of them in this room that I've met through LinkedIn. So I have a huge social network of people that inform me. So that was not a planned plug.
Thanks, appreciate it though.
Yeah, no problem.
LinkedIn are not sponsoring this session.
Yeah,
no, we aren't.
Yet. All right, what are we trying to do between now and 11 o'clock? We're going to drive this hard. How can organizations align training, learning, and development with business goals? How can higher education and the TVET sector interact more effectively with the workplace? And what kind of skills are needed these days? What kind of skills are coming down the track, most of which we don't really even know about? But how is the workforce going to be prepared for this? How are you going to be engaged professionally in this? What are the new opportunities? Remember, I ended yesterday by saying you may feel a bit intimidated and overwhelmed and maybe a bit pessimistic by what you've heard, but actually the driver is a new opportunity and plenty of new opportunities. So that's the spirit. The deal again is like yesterday. Each of the speakers will speak for about 15 minutes, and then I'll pick up any points that you raise with them immediately. There'll be chat up here as well. So there's not a Q&A at the end necessarily, but right from the get-go, any ideas you've got, stick them up there, please, on the address. Heather, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. How many of you guys in this room consider yourself in the learning business, right, by a show of hands? Okay, that's most of you. Those who didn't raise your hand, I hope you do by the end of this session. So I look at the world this way. I consider this the old economy. You were educated in one band, you had a career that was another band, you had a retirement that was another band. And whether you started on that career ladder after university or before, your education was sort of contained in the first third of your life. You got on a career escalator up to a point when you retired. Funny thing is, you retired, and about a year to 18 months later, you died. That was the plan. And we measured success, whether it be in higher ed or in training, by what was your placement rate into jobs and what was your starting salary. And we focused everything on that first step in the career ladder, wherever it was. Now I think it looks more like this. Ages are pushing out longer by at least a decade, and it's going to continue to accelerate. Education becomes learning, because I think learning is continuous, where education implies a state of being educated. It's overlapped with a band I call leverage. It's leverage of that learning. And then there's a reality of longevity. So it looks more like this. So the career ladder becomes a web, and we remain engaged. That does not mean you're going to be working till your 89th birthday. It just means you're going to be working differently for longer periods of time. We never plan for a 30-year vacation. And success measures need to alter between starting salary and establishing learning agility and agency. So to put it simply, I say we used to learn in order to work, learn to do something in order to work doing that thing, to now we must work in order to learn continuously. So to put some context on that, if you look at the largest companies by market cap, and many of them are US-based, over the last 100 years, in 1917, 4 of the 5 companies were about extracting value from natural resources. 50 years later, top 5 companies were about scalable production of man-made assets and services, man-made products and services. And if you look at where we are now, top 5 companies, I would argue 4, if not 5 of them, are all learning companies. We're moving from what John Hagel from Deloitte says, from scalable production to scalable learning. So our world back in the old economy was complicated. Problems broke down in subcomponents. Subject matters were taught in isolation. It was complicated. We're now moving into a world that's complex, and this has implications for how we organize people in a company. If you were a manager sort of in the old economy and this paradigm still exists, you were generally managing people who'd sat in all the chairs you'd already sat in. So you knew all those jobs. Now there are people that you may be managing who have knowledge, skills, experience, capabilities you know nothing about. So we need to think differently not only about learning, but how we organize humans. So in the past 10, 20, 25 years, we've got 3 major innovations. We have the internet, automated manufacturing, and a mobile device with intelligence in it. And if we look at what we can build on that over the next 10 to 20 years, a number of things, the Internet of Things, robotics, driverless cars, additive manufacturing, et cetera. But there's 2 I want to pay attention to the most. Process artificial intelligence and social artificial intelligence, because these are software-based solutions that can replace cognitive labor and scale very quickly at very low cost. This is the tsunami wave that's going to hit us soon. If you follow what McKinsey says about what percentage of our economy is digitized, in the US it's like 18–20%, in Europe it's somewhere between 10 and 15%. So the bulk of the digital wave is coming, it hasn't crashed yet. So if you look at humans in terms of eras, we are now entering our 5th era. Each era is identified by a time span, and you'll notice each one's collapsing by a factor of 10, so they're getting closer and closer. And it's defined by how we value talent and how we use tools. In time, I think we're between the information and the augmented era, but I think our mental models on our systems are stuck at least one era back, if not 2. So if we zero in on that, we are coming out of an era that was focused on acquired skill and expertise. Get a good major, get a good job, find the right skill. And tools were for cognitive reduction. So computers would help you do things you would already do, but you had to learn the tool in order to use it. Now we're moving into a realm where uniquely human skills, creativity, adaptability, learning, communication are becoming more valuable, the things the robots cannot do or automation cannot do. And that's cognitive augmentation, where we will not just learn the tool in order to use it, we will learn with the tool and from the tool, and that's a paradigm shift. So if we look at further back in 100-year increments and we look at the velocity of change, we've doubled our lifespan and more in the last 100 years or so. And if you look at changes that have occurred and changes ahead, looking at sort of Moore's law and its implication for products and services, we're going to see in the 1750s, you had multiple generations to absorb a single paradigm shift. Now we're going to have to absorb multiple paradigm shifts in a single generation. That requires a certain amount of emotional support as for people to go through these changes. So what's the answer? Learn, 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 right? I like Asimov's expression, we need to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And unlearning is probably one of the most important things we work on. So if we look at how computerized technology or non-biological intelligence is going to affect us, take a task. If it's complex and ambiguous, a human employee is still the best way to get that done. But if you can break that task down to something that is discrete and can be done in isolation, or what I call atomization, you can reduce that cost, and that task can be atomized. If you can further make that task defined, repetitive, and predictable, it can be automated. So as we let go of tasks, we have to upskill and reskill, unlearn and relearn to pick up new tasks. So this is the perceived career arc of a human. You come out of the workforce at you come and join the workforce at age 18 to 23 or to 30, somewhere in there depending on the level of education you get. You shoot up with a couple of rides up to about 45. That's when you hit your peak. And then you slide back down to 70 again. That's when you die. There's a reason for that. So this is the learn, contribute, retire model. If you fell out of this in the old economy, for some reason, there was panic. Because it wasn't supposed to happen, you were already on the escalator. But if we look at that arc now, why did that happen? We have the argument that you have greater brain plasticity when you're younger. People say that's actually not true, but that's something we've come to believe. You have acquired expertise in a single profession, it used to be. So you had sat in all those chairs below you. And then with age comes judgment, maturity, and wisdom. So 45 became that magical age because you had enough acquired expertise, enough knowledge, enough judgment, but still a little gas in the tank to really perform in the company. Then I looked at something, and no disrespect for my fellow on the stage here, I didn't ask him his age, but if you look at the new economy companies, the companies that were born digital, the median age are all below 35, some of them below 30. So if you look at that workforce, they're all digital natives. They all grew up with technology as a norm for them. And if you took their average age and you spread them out, and this is not scientific, they may not even hit what we have traditionally called the high value zone. I think this is really important stuff that's reshaping work. So is 45 becoming the new 35? Is 35 becoming the new 45 at a time that 79 is becoming the new 70? How do we think about that arc? Skills demands are skewing younger as we've got longevity going on. I think this is now creating 3 panic zones. Because 40 is the median age in the workforce in most developed countries. So you have the education panic, and where I'm in the US, a lot of it's about the cost panic, but there's also the relevancy panic of the entire K-12 and higher ed system. Work change panic. What happens when these people who went through the factory pipeline of education get digitally disrupted? When they define themselves by what they do, and suddenly that thing isn't there anymore. And then we have the longevity panic that I think most people realize we don't have enough money to put people on 30-year vacations. But I think it's that work change panic that's the greatest opportunity for the people in this room. Sorry. So what do we do? I think we need to retire these 3 questions. We got to make a commitment in this room to retire these 3 questions. What do you want to be when you grow up? Why do we ask kids what do you want to be when you grow up if more than half the jobs haven't even been created yet? It's cementing your sense of identity at a moment in time around a set of application skills and knowledge that may change. More than half of that work, not jobs, but work, may be automated in the next decade or 2. What's your major? This number's from the US. I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but less than 1/3 of people ever work in the field of their undergraduate major. But once you get in your major, that's all you can focus on. Can't take anything outside that. And then what do? This is from the Great Research Report from the Foundation for Young Australians. They believe that students coming out today will have 17 jobs across 5 different industries. If the higher ed system is focused on getting you your first job, that may last 18 months. In the US, that debt's going to last 20 years. So We used to educate people in single silos, disciplinary. I call this the I. And then it became the moment, like, we need T-shaped thinkers. We need people who have a depth of expertise, but they can work across domains. And this, now I think we need to move towards transdisciplinarity, where we work at the X, the intersection of disciplines, but also the intersection of biological and non-biological intelligence. And what John Hagel from Deloitte says is this is the movement from working with stocks of stored knowledge, being educated, to working in streams of knowledge and having learning agility and agency. So to put it simply, I say in the old economy, we learned in order to do something to produce a unit of value. In the new economy, we're going to learn to learn. That's where we've got to put our focus in our K-12 and even our higher ed systems. And learning and work is going to be an iterative act we do throughout our career. Learning is part of work. It's not a separate thing. The unit of value becomes a byproduct, and our goal and focus becomes increasing capability. If you go back to those 5 companies that are now the biggest companies in the world, they're all learning companies. They all win by learning faster, scalable learning. So how do we help people through these changes? This is a satire, I'm not even sure I'm saying it right, but it's a model for change that was developed by a family therapist in the US that some business person got a hand on, and everybody's using it in change management. They say that this is the process you go through when there's a major change. So you have your status quo, you have a catalytic event, something changes, you lose your job changes, you have some sort of loss in your life, you go through a period of chaos, and then you come to integration and a new status quo. I think this is the movement we'll have to go through to help people shift from one identity to other, from one role to another, from one type of expression of your knowledge to another. So the life blocks used to look like this: educate, work, retire, and we move through them pretty smoothly. Now I think they shift on their side, and it becomes engage, learn, and recondition. The lifespan is longer, and we move continuously in and out of them because learning is now part of work. So to summarize, future work, I think, is learning. The life blocks shift, and we need to rethink our systems of work and learning. We need to think about new definitions of self around purpose as opposed to practice, as opposed to how we apply our skills. And we need to figure out how to add social and emotional support for people going through these changes. The whole idea that we can take someone who was just shut out from a company, rendered irrelevant, and just give them new skills is missing the fact that they just lost a whole sense of self, their entire identity. And I think we have a lot of work to do in that area. So that's it. With 2 minutes and 8 seconds to spare.
Heather, thank you. Bluntly, how many people get this?
Okay, that's my wife in the front row who put her hand up. How many people understood that? Okay. More or less?
But what about out there?
How many people out there get it? Not based on our conversation, not as nearly as many that need to get it.
So what needs to happen for those out there to get it, as opposed to being constantly shocked and disillusioned by their prospects?
Well, I live in the US, and if I were to delve into politics at the moment, somebody won by promising people this wasn't coming, that they could return to a former state. I think that's really damaging. I think we have to acknowledge this is coming. The robots aren't going to take everything. We created everything around us. We created healthcare. We created education. We created government. We have the ability to create new things. We have to understand that this capability is coming, and it's good. It's going to take us to a more abundance than we've ever had before. It's just a matter of whether we organize for it, and we're aware of it, and we acknowledge it's coming rather than pretending it's not.
Question here, and please do use that address. It's the efficient way to get ideas onto the agenda. In your opinion, do employers have unrealistic expectations of new employees to possess specific skills and capabilities?
By the framing of that question, yes, because they're saying education happens over here, and then they should come in as a deployable workforce. I think we've focused on, an analogy I often use is we've been in education, we've been in the applications business. So you all have phones, you've added an application probably in the last week or last month because you could add a new capability. We've treated education like the applications business. What are you going to be when you grow up? What's your major? You're going to do that thing, as opposed to creating operating systems that allow people to add and delete many applications. So I think our formal system of education needs to focus on developing operating systems, and our world of work needs to realize that they need to develop operating systems, that our world of work needs to focus on helping people add and delete the applications that they will need in their lives.
Alan.
Can I flip the question?
Sure.
Which is, I saw a video, I can't remember, I saw a video, so I think it was a TED Talk, where this guy he was a coach, he was talking about, he was coaching some 26-year-old in the company, and during the coaching conversation, you know, the guy was saying, actually, I think I need to move on now, because I don't feel like I've changed enough, and he'd been in the company 3 months. So my question is, do employees have unrealistic expectations?
I've heard that mentioned a lot about millennials. They expect to be the CEO in like 6 months. There's some good in that. They want to make a difference in the world. They feel like if they're not making a difference. I actually talk to friends of mine when they're starting a new job and say, I don't care what your salary or title is, what are you going to learn? How long are you going to be there? And then what are you going to do next? We need to shift from looking at what we get out of a company in terms of being salary and the social signaling of being associated with a brand to tours of duty, as Reid Hoffman says, but learning tours of duty. So if they were in that company and they felt after 3 months, I'm not learning anything, and therefore I don't feel like I'm going to contribute for much longer, that may be the right decision.
Okay.
Dennis Grosland here. Dennis agrees with you, but how do we get politicians to understand this? Or do they need to understand it? Are they in denial almost about the scale and the enormity? They are, after all, those who are going to have to manage it at some point, even if they don't want to.
Yeah, I think they are in denial about it, or the ones who know about it know that it doesn't sell. I think we need to flip the conversation. We've talked about preserving wealth, at least a lot of it in the US. I've seen this happen in other countries. If we flip the conversation to how do we create taxpayers? If our single goal is to create taxpayers in this new economy, we would invest differently.
And one thought about the cost in time and money, because to reskill, particularly with the digital environment, does require time, it needs commitment. But to those who are struggling and maybe losing their jobs, there's also the issue of who pays for it and how can it be paid for.
Right. I mean, we have systems where you're paid when you're an employee, and only if you're classified an employee do you get uninsurance as that employee. We need to create portable systems that allow people to be paid while they're being reskilled. Because if you have that view that this is going to create a taxpayer in the end, you'd make that investment.
Alrighty, let's pause for the moment to go to Patrick. That's really helpful, Heather. Thank you very much indeed. I've got one other question. How can we learn how to learn? But we'll come back to that in a moment. Patrick.
All right, thank you. All right, hi everyone. Patrick King, as I mentioned, from our LinkedIn Insights team. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some trends that we're seeing on the platform. It's perfect that I'm going after Heather because a lot of the stuff that she touched on, we're already starting to see happen out there in the world. So today, my goal is that I hope you learned something. We are at a learning conference, so I hope that you can take something away from this and potentially shift your thinking. And so, as Heather mentioned, I saw this stat up on her presentation as well. 65% of the jobs we are going to hire for the next generation don't even exist today. And so I have a quick question for everyone. Who here has children under the age of 10? Excellent. All right. And so have children under the age of 10, potentially going to have children. I don't have children myself, but when you think about some of the jobs that they're going to be having, how about the commercial drone industry? We think about kind of drones are a little bit of a toy at this point. People have probably read about Amazon getting into the drone world. And so commercial drone industry, we've got 3D printing, things like automation auditors, design engineers. Cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is going crazy right now. It's stealing all the headlines. And so currency adoption specialists or cryptocurrency theorists, almost the economists of the cryptocurrency world. Future agriculture. There's a lot going on in terms of molecular gastronomy, land, sea farming is a big thing in the States right now, biomeat factory engineers. And so there are jobs, there are going to be jobs. And while, yes, there is going to be some automation and there's going to be some robots taking over, so to speak, there's going to be a whole new set of jobs. And so one of the questions that Nick had brought up is really tying this to business challenges. And so I focus a lot on what our clients are doing in terms of how they can leverage some of our data to really get at what what they're trying to do. And we know that proving ROI in learning is very difficult. I'm not going to say I'm giving you a magic formula today for ROI. I know how hard it is. I've been studying this for a while. And so we're going to talk about skill gaps and some of the skill gaps that Heather mentioned and what we're seeing on our platform, and also retaining employees. I think that, you know, a stat, I apologize, I forget the source of this stat, but in the 1970s, the average number of employers that someone would have entering the workforce was 2. The people going into the workforce today will have 4 employers before they're 30. And so it's just a completely different shift. And how can we retain employees and allow for internal mobility so that we can continue to capture the gains that as we upskill them? And so I like to start with our vision at LinkedIn, which is creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. Mostly because I believe that, and again, I'm a data guy, so forgive me, I might be biased. It's really the interaction of all the things that we have on our platform between our members, our jobs, our skills, companies, educational institutions, and how these all tie together and allow for this economic opportunity. And so we'll dive right into skill gap. Skill gap is one of the hottest terms out there right now. Skill gaps are going to continue to exacerbate when we think about lower and middle skill activities, so those activities that are easy to automate, those activities that are predictable. However, there's still going to be a shortage of high skill talent, of emotional skill talent, as Heather mentioned, providing emotional support. And so what's going to happen is essentially between 2016 and 2025, and this is from Eurostat, about 15 million jobs requiring high educational attainment will be created. Some of them are going to be commercial drone or bio-food engineers. And so what's going to happen is that there are going to be new jobs created. And what we're seeing is we're actually already starting to see this on our platform. And so shout it out, who can guess the #1 in-demand skill on LinkedIn globally for the last 3 years? Just shout it out. What was that? Big data analytics. Great for me, job security. But we've all heard big data for a few years now. For the last 3 years, globally, most countries' top skill, it is the most in-demand skill on the planet, as far as we're seeing in our data. And so big data is here, and it's not going anywhere. But what's interesting is there's a new kind of big data. I think Heather touched on it a bit. It's been stealing a few of the headlines. So who thinks they know some of the top skills in the past 12 months that we've been seeing, some of the fastest growing skills? What was that? Blockchain is getting there, not necessarily in the last 12 months, but it's getting there. That is one that's popping a lot. Anybody else? What was that? 3D printing is up there. Not quite what I'm going to highlight today, but that's definitely in the top like 20 or 25. AI. And so these 3 skills, deep learning is essentially algorithms that mimic what the human brain does. We call them neural nets. It's essentially how we're going to have driverless cars. Spring Boot and Kubernetes are automation frameworks. They're actually for automating code and writing code so that there needs to be a little less hand-holding when it comes to deploying technology and things that are built with code. And so when we think about that in the job market, one thing we have on LinkedIn is we've got a lot of jobs, as everyone knows. Big data is grown 90% year over year. That is a staggering number. But it looks pretty small on this chart, huh? Robotics jobs are up almost 600%, and this is in the EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. These are jobs on our platform year over year, so this is last year versus this year. Robotics jobs are up almost 600%. Machine learning jobs up 270%. Internet of Things, that's IoT, is up 400%. And so, as Heather mentioned, we're kind of right between those 2 ages. What we're seeing on our platform is we're already there. There's already robotics. There's already big data. Big data is not even the thing anymore. It's really about that data 2.0. And so there's a lot of tech skills out there, right? And so we're all worried about robots taking our jobs and everything. But on the flip side, there's actually a huge uptick in non-tech skills. And so LinkedIn, we worked with the World Economic Forum and McKinsey, who just released this, this report about just kind of, it's not just about technology skills. It's not just about robotics and big data and things like that. It's about human interaction skills, so relationship management. Leadership and management becomes more and more important in a world of uncertainty. And then there's this other piece, creative problem solving, collaborative problem solving. And so these things that cannot be automated are becoming more and more important, and things that we want to train people in. So yes, we do want to train people in writing code and robotics and things like that, but it's also the soft skills, the relationship management. Those relationships aren't going anywhere, especially as we spend more and more time staring at our phones. It's important to continue to improve relationships. And there's another interesting piece, which is this transferable foundational skills. As I mentioned, employees are moving around more than ever these days. And so the ability to have basic skills like creative, simple writing, drafting an email, the ability to track budgets, the ability to use Microsoft Office products. These transferable skills are important because it allows for a shorter ramp time, which of course leads to more value creation for the employee. And so there are plenty of skills outside of the crazy high-tech skills that engineers are working on that are going to be needed in this new economy. And so that's a little bit about skill gap. I'm going to move into retention. Retention's a big one, right? As I mentioned, people are moving around more than ever. It's an expensive problem. The Society for Human Resource Management, which is a US-based, if you guys haven't noticed, I'm from the States, a US-based organization estimates that the cost of losing an employee is anywhere between 50 and 250% of their total annual compensation. So for those of you in the room that work for a corporation, just take a second to think about that. How many people leave your company on a given basis? Multiply by up to 250% of their salary. Millions? Tens of millions? So yeah, retention is an issue. And so if we actually look in Germany, luckily we have some data on this as well. The average tenure of a German LinkedIn members when they switched jobs in the last year is about 28 months. So, and this is actually a little bit higher than average. We're actually seeing less than 2 years in a lot of different countries. And so, but even higher than average, we're talking just over 2 years. When we specifically look at IT and engineering, it's even shorter. So 61% of German IT and engineering folks that switched jobs in the last 10 years had less than 2 years of tenure. So if you're talking about a 6 to 9 month ramp period potentially for a very highly intensive job, you're barely getting more than a year of value. And so retention is something that, while yes, we want to retain employees, we want to create internal mobility, and so we allow these employees to stay at our company. We don't necessarily want them staying in the same job, but the ability to create internal mobility and retain your employees and capture that value is important. The reason being is that the number one reason, we did a survey of members, we worked with Randstad about 1.5 years ago, and the number one reason for leaving your employer, we asked members why they left. We basically saw people that had left their job recently. And I was concerned about the lack of opportunities for advancement. A stat recently that came out from the World Economic Forum was that 42% of millennials would essentially leave their organization if they were not happy with their career development opportunities. As Heather mentioned, they all want to be CEO in 6 months. And so providing opportunities for advancement, providing career development is becoming more and more, it's not just important because of some of the stats that I've shown you before, but the generation that is coming into the workforce, becoming the largest portion of the workforce very soon, this is all they care about. This is more important to them than benefits and compensation. This is more important to them than even having an impact or doing interesting work. This is the most important thing to them. And so this is why people leave companies. And so I'm actually going to wrap up with plenty of time as well. So wrapping up, robots are here. The robots aren't coming. They're actually here. The AI and robotics of the future, we're already seeing it a lot on our platform. My guess is that those numbers next year may be even higher, if that's possible, if you think about growth. So robotics job postings are up 554%. My big data was a measly 88%, which just looked crazy small compared to the rest of these big data technologies. Again, technical skills are dominating the headlines. We hear all about robots and automation of jobs, but there is going to be a world in which soft and foundational skills are equally important. One thing is, as you think about this new industrial revolution or this artificial intelligence revolution, augmented reality revolution, every point in which we've kind of made a shift change in terms of the economy and how we structure it, from agricultural to industrial to information to this new one. It's made life better for generally the general public. We're living in a world where global poverty rates have decreased significantly. And so we're going to get through this. We might have to shift our jobs a bit. I think we may have to become commercial drone operators or biofood chemists. But at the end of the day, the robots aren't necessarily going to take over. And of course, the number one reason for employees leaving their jobs is due to the lack of career advancement opportunities. And so in order to retain your employees, providing them the ability to actually advance their career and learn something is going to keep them in seat and keep you guys capturing gains a little bit longer. And with about 2 minutes to spare, thank you guys very much.
I'm getting a whole bundle of questions which are applying to all three of the speakers, so I'm going to hold back on some of them. By the way, those of you who are standing up, there are some chairs at the front, so please, they're not reserved for anybody, so please do come and use that. Probably about a dozen chairs, if you can, but you'll have to look for them. By the way, I have seen the future. There is now a robot moderator. So my job is, I'm going to have to become a data analyst as well. A robot will be able to say that better. But I'm serious, I saw one on a platform recently, and also I've got to tell you that robots are getting much better at addressing conferences than people. So even panelists won't exist in future, because under AI, they will be more efficient than you. So enjoy this while you can. One question here for you, Patrick. Can you give us a transferable best practice from learning and development at LinkedIn? How do you upskill in LinkedIn? That's
a great question. I think one of the best examples is our leadership and management program, which we call Manage In. Everything has an in at the end of it. It's a little bit kitschy, but when we think about Manage In, we like to practice what we preach. We have a lot of e-learning, and it's a blended approach. And what we do is we provide coaching sessions. We take people out of seat. We essentially blend everything from e-learning to mobile learning to instructor-led courses to follow-ups with coaching sessions. And this is for managers as they're in the middle of their day job. And it is one of the biggest things that I've noticed that we're very good at, and organizations that do well at learning are giving people space to learn. If I put up an out-of-office message and I've got to run a business and I'm in Manage In, people understand. And there's no worries about, hey, like I got to get this, oh, they're in Manage In, no big deal. So I think giving space and allowing space to learn and having that really be part of your performance management is something that we do internally very well, and I would urge all of you to do. And there are a lot of questions here, but again, given you've raised it and also Heather raised it, and maybe Alan will as well, about this issue of churn and keeping hold of people. How do you do it at LinkedIn? That's an interesting question, because the way we think about it at LinkedIn is we're always talking about transformation. It's one of our core values, and really just the idea that you're always thinking about your next job. We embrace the fact that everyone's about 29, 30 years old at our company, and really just wants to change the world and get a new job. And we embrace that, and we have active conversations with our employees about, what is your next play? What are you looking to do next? And ideally, we'd like to keep them internally. We allow for internal mobility. That's why I kept talking about internal mobility. We try to find them a role within the company, but ultimately, if they're going to leave the company, the way that we feel is that if we've impacted your trajectory, and hopefully we've gotten our own value, but hopefully we've given you the tools and skills while you were here that you've learned that's actually, if you think about your trajectory, it's kind of pitched it up a bit. And so while we hate to see employees leave, at the end of the day, if that's better for them, then they've got to do what's best for them. Are they allowed to actually apply for jobs advertised on LinkedIn? Yep. Yeah. So generally what we do is you have a conversation with your manager and say, hey, I like to start thinking about, we call it our next play. But at the same time, again, we'll have that conversation like, hey, you just started 3 months ago. Let's talk about this in 6 months. So there's obviously that conversation. We're not necessarily encouraging employees to switch jobs every 3 months. But yes, if we decide that we'll have that conversation, hey, let's look for you something internally. I'll set you up with, do you want to go into sales? You can talk to some salespeople, operations. You can, I'll introduce you to those people. And ultimately, if we decide, hey, like maybe a smaller company is better for you, then feel free to use our resources to find that job.
Quickly, Heather, Alan, do you want to pick up anything on specifics that Patrick's mentioned? Okay, righty. Patrick, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. But again,
Thank you.
A lot of questions here coming through. So let's do a hot switch, and Alan, you take over and keep the questions coming, because what I'll be doing is grouping them to give a sense of the kind of clusters that are emerging on several points.
Good morning. Am I on? Can you hear me? I'm on, yes. So I'm Alan Ryan. Who here has heard of the NHS? Okay, so I'm going to explain some of that in a minute. So I'm Irish, but don't live in Ireland anymore, so if I speak too quickly, please throw something at me. I also like interaction, so you're either going to hate me or not hate me. I won't go as far as love me at the end of this, so I need everybody to stand up, please. Stand up. Anybody who's responsible for health and safety, please look away now. My kids, I've got 4 boys, love basketball and force me to look at it all the time. And there's a thing on basketball. Who likes basketball? You hear kiss cam? You've all heard of kiss cam? Yeah? Where they focus the camera in and you have to turn to the person to your left or right and kiss them, okay? I'm not going to make you do that. Don't worry. Calm down. It's okay. Don't panic. But what I am going to do is I went to a conference in Uganda a few years ago, e-learning Africa, and every single talk I went to, the one common thing at the start is they made everybody dance. It was just a rule. Everybody had to dance. So this video is 3 minutes long, okay? Depending how well you dance will determine the length of the video. You dance really well, I'll finish it in 5 seconds. You don't dance very well, I'm going to keep going for the whole 3 minutes. Okay? Right? So. We're still looking at 3 minutes here. We're still looking at 3 minutes. I can see you at the back. I know. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. Okay. Right. So, the National Health Service in the UK is what it says. It is a National Health Service. If you're unwell in the UK, you just go to your GP or doctor. There's never a charge. Okay. And in the UK, it's one of those things that politicians aren't allowed to touch, although they don't realise that and they touch it all the time and try and change it all the time. So it's an organisation that roughly we spend, I'm getting old. I'm in that panicking mode that Heather was talking about. I'm definitely there. So we spend about 160 billion a year on the NHS across the UK. I work for, it's gone, that organisation there, which is Health Education England, and we spend 4.8 billion on education. Our responsibility is about training the right workforce for the NHS. And that's just not about clinicians. You know, the NHS is probably the biggest IT employer in the UK. And that translates to about over £500,000 an hour we spend on training and education. So we take this really seriously. Because I don't know there are many organisations that could say they spend that much on training and education. And as I say, I work for Health Education England, which is responsible for that. We have about, depending on who you ask, it's roughly about 1.5, 1.6 million staff working in the NHS. So it's a big organisation. And when I say an organisation, the NHS isn't one organisation, it's multiple organisations. But we tend to treat it as one. And people always say we're kind of the 3rd biggest employer. We're depending on what figures you use, we're roughly about 4 or 5 in the world, after US Defence Department, People's Liberation Army, Walmart, McDonald's, etc. We continue to grow the number of people in the NHS. So this shows the general trend of the amount of people we train and employ in the NHS, and we keep growing that. But actually, we have a massive problem. Everybody's getting older, and they're not dying off quick enough, to be frank. You know, everybody does die eventually, but they're not dying in time. Okay, this is the bit I definitely don't want published, just so we're clear. But our problem is that more and more people are getting older and surviving longer, and they have multiple conditions, lots of complex conditions. And that means that actually, even though we are growing the NHS, we have still huge deficits in regards to the number of people we need. And that trend isn't too much different throughout the world, to be honest. People always say that there's a kind of global shortage in healthcare workers. Depending on how you look at it, that's different. It's how many we would want and how many we can afford are 2 different things. And the way we look at that is we look at, supply, how many can we train, how many can we get in. But actually, we have a massive problem. You mentioned retention in the NHS. There are mental health trusts in the United Kingdom that lose 40% of their staff every year, just churn through. Some of them we don't know where they go to. So we don't just look at training new people. We look at how can we change the way they work, upskilling. So can we make a nurse do endoscopy, for example? Can we create new roles like physician assistants to do work that can release other clinicians to do other work? Leadership is pretty obvious, and new ways of working. So, pharmacists traditionally in the UK stand behind a desk and give you out drugs, but we're now training them to work in primary care and actually have a clinical workload and see patients, particularly with long-term conditions. Who here genuinely remembers using one of these? So that was the NHS context. I'm just going to say the word context. Okay, you're not as, how do I put it? You're older than you look. That's the nice way of putting it, isn't it? Okay, right. Can we turn the volume up?
In there. No, you put it into a TV. And you didn't have TVs back in those days. Yeah. In the 80s, there weren't any TVs.
So you are the last of the pre-internet generation, because the CDs came in about, I think, the late 90s, mid-90s, which is kind of when roughly the internet started and things like that. My kids now, the idea of actually going to something, pressing a button, and having to wait to forward it to the next song, or actually even having to put something in to find a song, that you can't just talk to OK Google or Siri and just say, I want to listen to this. It's a complete mystery to them. You don't even have to go that far. 2005, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was still a sound, cloud was something in the sky, 4G was a parking space, LinkedIn was a prison. It's clearly not anymore. An app was something you sent to college, and Skype was a typo. I think LinkedIn is on this, so LinkedIn haven't paid me for this at all, but the world has changed so much. Facebook is now arguably, it's bigger than any country out there. If you look in my world of healthcare education, if you look, this is a picture, I think, from the 14th century of one of the first kind of lectures, and I could pass all kind of smart comments on that, but I won't. But if you look at every kind of report that's been done in the UK and Europe on healthcare education, there's a common theme through all of them, which is we're rubbish at sharing and we're rubbish at using technology. That's pretty much it. There's other themes, but they're the themes that I focus on. So 2014 was a really important year. So this is where I test your honesty. Who here owns a onesie? Does anybody know what a onesie is? Is that a UK thing? Is it? Okay, right, okay. Oh, we're doing it over here, right, okay. So that's a onesie, okay? It's a onesie, you wear one thing, okay? I thought that was a world phenomenon, but it clearly isn't. They're my 4 boys, and that's years ago. Now that guy there is now about an inch higher than me and can beat me up, and has also decided he wants to do medicine, and all I'm thinking is it's going to cost me a fortune. But the important thing for me in 2014 is that's when there was a kind of crossover between internet access was more on mobiles than desktop. And actually the mobile phone is, for an education point of view, and from my point of view in the healthcare service, is phenomenally powerful. Having all that information in your pocket is really powerful. And it clearly has some negatives as well. And who here has felt their phone vibrating in their pocket when it isn't been in their pocket? You're not being as honest as you normally are. So statistically, apparently, so some neuroscientists told me, I don't know how true this is scientifically, but if you have a phone for a period of time, it changes the way you think. It's the whole, is my phone ringing? Is my phone ringing all the time? So apparently 98% of you have felt your phone vibrating in your pocket when it hasn't been there. And of that, something like 46% of you have felt your phone vibrating in your pocket when you've been holding it in your hands. And when I saw that was great. I realized I wasn't sick, because for ages I was thinking, why is my leg vibrating? So, the world has changed. The amount of content and information we have out there is phenomenal. And, you only have to, there's a website called, I think it's Live Internet Stats. If you're ever bored, go on that, and it'll just show you how much stuff is happening all the time. And from my point of view, a huge amount of that is education. That's just a quote of the best description I've ever seen of the internet. But in that we're coming up to Christmas, clearly Santa has clearly had to have some e-learning, I bet you, and some CPD, and change these skills, because, the letters have changed in regards to how you're getting your Christmas list. And really, the future is stupid, and anybody who says they can predict the future, you can't predict the future. Nobody knows where it's going. So some of the things we're doing in the health service in the UK is, I'm not going to go into all of these, but so I have a team so I'm responsible for all sorts of programs around how many psychiatrists we have, how do we train more GPs, all things like that. But the thing I'm really passionate about is technology-enhanced learning. And I've got a team who do that. And there's one thing we're trying to do at the moment, we're trying to do this, what we call the learning solution, which is an area where we can share all educational resource across the whole UK. Because we know lots of things get invested and people don't share them. I'm going to go quickly because I'm going to run out of time and I can't be the one who goes over time. So I'm going to skip those ones and I can talk about them later. We also have a central e-learning system across the whole UK where we develop content and make it available to the whole NHS free of charge because we are part of the NHS. And just some quick statistics on that. So we have about 800,000 users on that platform alone, add another 1 million on that for the other national platform. There's about, I think it's 680 years of learning that we've developed so far and that people have accessed. And people love technology-enhanced learning. So if you look at nursing, for example, the average age of a nurse when they start training is about 27. Most of them happen to be female. I'm one of those unique male, strange people who are a nurse, but most of them happen to be female. Most of them happen to have children. So the idea of being able to put your kids to bed and then go online and do your learning is hugely advantageous, hugely advantageous. So the future of learning, some thoughts. So again, no, I wasn't paid to put here, but it's a big business. And you're going to correct me if I got this stat wrong, but LinkedIn bought Linda for $1.5 billion. You know, it's a massive business. It's absolutely a massive business. And the other thing is, who's a teacher? I'm normally speaking to a health audience. So I'm not of the group that thinks teaching is going to be replaced by AI. I think teachers will always, he said, Don may disagree with me, but I think teachers are always going to be there, as I think healthcare professionals will always be there. It can be helped by other technology. So I think the kind of the technologies to watch out, and watch out for, and it's come up already, is artificial intelligence. You'll all know about Watson and winning in Jeopardy, and it costs, I think, £1 million to make. You know, you can pretty much buy that and put it in your kitchen now, can you, with these kind of devices? You know, the idea, that's Google's very first sexy car, but clearly Tesla did a far better job of it. But the idea that your car can just park yourself or take you home after you've had a couple of pints is just fantastic. And, you know, I'm going to skip through this, but, you know, the fact that AI is progressing so fast now, I think the last couple of years have been a real tipping point for AI. And in the NHS, so there's a company called Babylon, and they're doing these kind of online appointments, but they're putting huge investment into AI, actually, because at the moment you see a real person at the end of a Skype call or similar to that. But actually in the future, that will change, because you won't get to the person that you've gone through a whole lot of other things. There's a thing called Amy.xi, I think, which is a virtual assistant. I trialed it a couple of years ago, and you just copy this virtual assistant in when you're sending somebody an email to arrange an appointment, and then that AI takes over and talks to the person. And a good 80% of the people that were making the appointments had no idea they were talking to a computer. They had no idea they were talking to Amy. The big thing for me for AI is personalized learning. It's the ability that actually the learning can be completely personalized and just done for me, for what I need. So we did some work with Donald again on Wildfire, where you can dump a lot of content in and it produces e-learning in a blink of an eye. Absolutely fantastic. Virtual reality and augmented reality, they're the sexy things, I have to say. I think augmented reality has probably a bit more of a future than virtual reality, but you know, this kind of thing, you just point a phone to it and a heart comes up and you can zoom in and out of the heart and things like that. These are some guys that did a t-shirt.
It's the ultimate way to learn about the body. We call it the virtuality. It's super simple. Load the app, point the device at the t-shirt.
So that's fantastic if you're teaching anatomy. Obviously, we'd expect our doctors to have maybe a bit more knowledge than that. But, you know, this is Donald, stand up. This is Donald Clark. I mean, most people will know Donald Clark. He's very famous. Sit down. This is his sister. And he gave me permission to use this. And just look at this for a moment. So this is her on a virtual roller coaster. And this is 4 or 5 years ago, is it? 3 years ago. So it's quite early in this technology, actually. I'm going to go over by about 2 minutes. Is that okay? So now she's now been showing a bungee jump. So who here has done a bungee jump? Okay, I've never done a bungee, and I never will do a bungee jump, I have to say, because I know what happens to your hips. So that's, for me, that's what every educational experience should be like. That's what it should be like. That's the feeling. She will never forget that. I don't know if she's ever done a bungee jump, but as far as she's concerned, she's done a bungee jump, and her hips are safe, but everything else isn't, I have to say. And really good editing by Tom as well on that. For me, the advantage of technology in this arena is it just makes education so much more effective. This is a company, I think, called Magic Leap. So a bit of augmented reality. You know, you can see that very much translated into how you do healthcare training. These are just some examples of, I think this one here is Microsoft HoloLens up here, which I had a play with last year, and it's absolutely phenomenal. We can have 4 or 5 people with headsets on, all playing with something virtual that they all can see and fiddle around with. And it's, you know, the idea of learning anatomy that way compared to learning on a page is hugely advantageous. So as this is a learning conference, I just want to give you a couple of skills. Who here has children? Okay, this is going to be really important to you. Okay, so some text talk. So stress that big time. Can I copy your homework? Parent alert, parent watching, parent gone, parent around. There's a theme, parent in the room, parents are listening. My eyes are glazing over, okay. And the next one, hello again. I really like that. Years ago, I was doing a talk in the Royal College of Ophthalmology, and I was getting ready, and at 4 o'clock every day, what I do is I sign on to Apple, and I lock my kids' phones, because otherwise they won't do their homework. And then, so after I did the talk, everybody saw me do this. The only thing they wanted to talk about was, how do you do this? Our world has completely changed. You've got to be careful with all this tech, of course. This is Ronnie O'Sullivan. And there's a real road signs that the Russian authorities, I have no idea why you'd be standing in front of a train, but anyway. So I'll rush through this. Technology is great. It will make a massive difference to education, and I love it. Thank you very much. Sorry I ran over.
Alan, I don't think you've given us full disclosure. The lady with VR on was actually in an NHS ward.
Well, yes. Let's not go
and
there.
remember, if you're cursing the fact that people are living so long, that's because the NHS is rather efficient.
It is.
It keeps people alive.
It is.
You're fulfilling your mandate.
Yeah, just so I'm clear, I'm very happy people are living longer. Please don't run out of here thinking Alan wants everybody dead. I don't.
Otherwise, it could be tweeted. Careful.
Yeah, yes, please don't tweet that.
A couple of specific questions for you. How is the NHS using horizon scanning for development, from Joe Cook?
So actually, in that circle I showed around what our central team are doing, we have a whole focus on horizon scanning, and developed a process in regards to how we keep an eye on what's coming down the road, and how we don't just fall for fads. It's you can spend a lot of money on what is trendy at the moment. And the NHS, IT-wise, we only dropped support for Internet Explorer 8 about 6 months ago. It's working on systems that are very, very old. So the thing we have to do in the NHS is we have to be very innovative, because we're not normally able to use really up-to-date tech. We've lots of tech in regards to service, but in regards to education, a lot of the time we're limited. So we have to be very careful about how we keep an eye on innovation. There is lots of local innovation going on. I can go to any part of the NHS and I will find a junior doctor who happens to code as well, and they've developed, induction through VR or resuscitation through VR or that kind of thing. But then actually nobody finds out about it. So then you have somebody over here 10 miles down the road doing exactly the same thing. And that's part of the reason the whole sharing bit is so important for us.
And in a minute, the NHS suffered a major cyber attack a few weeks ago. What's the outcome of that? What have you learned from that when it comes to learning and digitization?
So this is now a personal view. I feel one of the things that should be centralized in the NHS is IT. because actually part of the reason that it's all localized in trust, and part of the reason some of this happened was that actually we have different standards in different trusts. Some of the reason that we were working out...
But you were trolled, weren't you?
Yeah, we were trolled, absolutely. But some of the vulnerabilities were related to, we have equipment that requires old browsers and things to run, and to be frank, we try and get as much out of every piece of equipment in the NHS. So a CT scanner, you know, might be, say, we might normally get 15 years, we'll try and get 20, 25 years out of it for obvious reasons, because there's economics involved in that. It's walking the NHS up to data security, absolutely, but...
Were you warning about it in advance, but no one listening?
I think some people were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, I've got a lot of very important questions which are for all of you. Let me give you what Charles Jennings has written. The entire L&D industry is based on a learn, then work model. Is it really possible that the tanker can be turned around rather than sunk? Heather?
I think it depends on the skill you're talking about. So I think that there are some things you can't go in and do surgery and learn while you're doing it, obviously. But I think there are some skills that you can... Apprentice is a great model. I mean, there are ways in which you can work to learn, but I obviously don't think it's for situations of life and death and that sort of thing.
But that language, the tanker could be turned around rather than sunk. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, really just being able to provide space and building it into the culture when you think about corporations. And on the government side, it's realizing that we need to upskill these people and how to provide those skills and turning it around, yeah. You just need to provide the space. It needs to become a priority.
Alan?
So that's exactly what we're doing in the NHS, is apprenticeships are now becoming big. In the UK, if you're an employer of, I think it's over 300, if your turnover is over 300 million, you legally have to contribute to a thing called the apprenticeship levy. And the only way, to be frank, the organisation gets the money back is by having apprenticeships, because that money pays for the training. So we're looking at converting a lot of professions to apprenticeship training. They'll still come out with the right academic qualifications to degrees and masters, etc., but a lot more training on the job. And also, we're looking at part-time training. So we have a lot of people who may be in what we call a healthcare assistant role, which is a kind of we have banding in the NHS, band 4 role, so it's an unqualified role. We are looking at systems to actually allow them to train to be a nurse associate, say 2 or 3 days a week, and keep working the other 2 or 3 days a week. I've maybe got the wrong number of days in the week, but allow them to do that. So apprenticeships are going to be absolutely enormous. And actually, and again, please don't tweet this, but if you look at medicine, it is an apprenticeship by probably any other description. You know, we'd never call it an apprenticeship, but it is. And I think particularly in the UK, apprenticeships now have a far high, you know, the status previously were always, you weren't able to go to university, therefore we'd push you off to an apprenticeship. Actually, I think the whole industry is moving that apprenticeships are absolutely the way to train. And arguably, you get a better result at the end. You get what you need at the end rather than... So an example, there's a profession called orthotists. They're the people who make the braces for your neck and your legs and things like that. When they train in university, they train on ridiculously wonderful, fantastic 3D printers and high-end kit. When they go out to work in the real life, they're at a workbench and they're using tools. So there's something about, you know, making sure we're training the right type of people for what we need.
Okay, there's a lot here about the concern about the social impact of this scale of change, given that people expect, a certain generation expect there to be a certain continuity in the way you live and work. Here from Martin Notu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, what happens to your social life if you change job and location every 28 months? And the implications, therefore, for managing this, both personally and more broadly, whether it be by location or whatever. Patrick?
And yeah, I think this is a personal opinion, and so when you think about changing jobs every 28 months, yeah, that's totally uprooting your living situation, your social life. Ultimately, I think it comes back to the answer to the last question, which is, in order to create a world in which this can happen and we can allow for more fluidity, we do need to have a little bit more of an awareness and understanding that this is the way things are now, essentially, and the ability to move more freely between different cities, things like that, I think will become imperative over the future.
And what about, Heather, you're dealing with a lot of people right at the top of companies and public service as well. What about their ability to adapt, given the acute pressures and often the the short length of time that they now accept that they will actually retain that job?
Right. It depends on the industry they're in, but you know, in the higher ed industry, for example, a university president in the U.S. anyway is about 7.1 years is the average. So they figure in that years how many things are they going to get done that get them to the next job. And there's some good in that. It's less than 10 years because the world's changing so quickly. You don't want someone sitting in that job for 20 or 30 years. But the model has been so much like, how can I make this look good really quickly so I can get the next one? And that doesn't always create the lasting change. So I think we need to have more incentives in place. And in our public markets, it's how do I get the next quarter to look good? How do I get the next quarter to look good? And I think that the focus on the capital markets have really hurt us in the long term because you're always trying to make your quarter.
There's one here, which there are several about HR. What is the essential new role for modern learning and development at HR departments? Sorry, I can't see all three of you, but I'll stand forward. About HR departments and the way they have to handle this, or the way they have to adapt.
I refer to the HR people, I call them the enlightened HR people. They are the key to the future, I think. The ability to, the way we've attracted and screened talents in the past has been like, have you done this before? Can you prove to me you've done this before? Well, if 65% of the jobs haven't been created yet, you're not going to find people who've done it before. So a lot of organizations, and you mentioned the core values at LinkedIn, like Amazon and LinkedIn and others have said, okay, what is our culture? How do we define our culture so we have a good cultural fit? Because whatever I'm screening somebody for, it could be 4 months to 18 months from the time I discover I have a need to the time I actually get need relief. Undoubtedly, that need's changed. So I need to find someone who fits our values. So individuals have to figure out what their values are so they can create cultural alignment. And I think HR professionals are going to be at the forefront of that.
Alan.
I think for me, the really important thing and I absolutely agree with Heather said, is enabling the flexibility. You know, we see in the health service that more and more of the people now coming out of medical school and nursing school, they want portfolio careers. You know, previously when you became a consultant gastroenterologist, you were a consultant gastroenterologist for all your life. Now people want to be able to do different things. And so I think HR and professional bodies, we need to enable that flexibility for people to be able to add skills and move elsewhere and things like that.
Just a quick question directly for you, Alan. Just come in. How does the NHS measure the effectiveness of learning since the NHS invests millions in learning?
So the nirvana is to show that it affects patient care. But that's nigh on impossible to do for ethical reasons and all sorts of things, and because there are so many inputs. So we use a variety of tools from just surveys and getting people's opinions as to whether it's increased their confidence. When we do something particularly big like say AMR, so antimicrobial resistance training, then through data we can gather, because one of the big things the NHS has is huge amounts of data. We can make assumptions that a national training programme and the results are linked. But that's probably the best we can do. Technical question here, just after you finish speaking, Patrick, from Boeta Pretorius. Patrick, how did you come up with the number, how much it will cost to lose an employee?
That was not myself. That was the Society for Human Resources Management in the States. They essentially did a study with some of the top companies in the United States and said, okay, well, what is this actually costing you in recruiting costs and lost productivity? And they came up with a number about 50% on the low end, 50 to 75% for an entry-level employee, up to 250% for a principal engineer, senior leader. And so that wasn't actually us. It was Society for Human Resource Management. Okay, an important point of principle here from Vicky Brown. Should employers be responsible for assisting their employees on fixed-term contracts to be redeployed elsewhere in the organisation with reference to the subject of retention? Heather.
I think so. I think learning's got to be everybody's business. And so whether somebody's engaged in your organization as employee or a fixed-term contract or whatever the nature of the engagement is, it's in our best interest to continually upskill our populace, whether they stay within our company or they go to another one. So yes.
But do you think companies have now factored this into their costing and their budgets?
No, not yet, but I think they need to.
What kind of percentage do they need to add?
I don't know what percentage they need.
But is it significant or marginal?
I think it's significant because they haven't been investing very much in it at all. So yes, it's significant.
Patrick?
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that, one of the things we've talked a lot, my presentation touched on a lot of technology skills, soft skills, transferable skills. There's a huge bit that we don't have really any data on, which is the business-specific knowledge. And so even though those people are fixed-term contractors, consultants, they do have that business knowledge. So I think it's in the company's best interest. They don't have to worry about, the cost of ramp time, the cost of just general understanding of the business. And so it is in their best interest to allow for that.
Because this issue is clearly worrying quite a lot of people here. This from Mikkel Smith from Denmark. How do companies handle this larger movement in and out of the companies due to workers acquiring new qualifications? That the company may have to invest in it themselves. In other words, this issue of the cost, not least in potential just the way in which it disturbs a kind of equilibrium that you assume that you might have, but is very quickly thrown into the air by people leaving, people wanting to do different things, people just being dissatisfied. Patrick? Cool.
Yeah, and I think, going back to some of my earlier points, embracing this and embracing the fact that there not only is there going to be change, but it will continue to increase in size and speed, and really just being flexible in the way that you react to this, and encouraging it, and really looking for those internal mobility perspectives. So it's, yes, people are leaving, and yes, people want new jobs, but how can we find them new roles within our company, and so that we can retain that business knowledge, we can make a more engaged employee.
Heather and Alan. Heather.
Yeah, I think that we've got this notion as one person, one job, and we need to think more about it as collaborative teams working in a certain area, so that if one person leaves, that the team continues. And having succession plans that are multiple levels deep, so that if an individual does leave, you know how that continuity continues.
Because Alan, you used that figure of 40% at one point of large numbers leaving, and you're not sure where they're going or what they're doing. But that issue of not companies, but how do organizations handle this much larger movement in and out?
So the NHS is slightly privileged in this thing, because actually, if they're moving somewhere in the NHS, that's fine by us, because it's still part of the NHS. So a lot of the times, we would never block that. I think there's something for me which comes back to the apprenticeship thing, which is about growing your own, and then keeping them within, for us, the NHS. So I know locally to where I live in Stevenage is a big space centre. They're building the Mars rover, and Airbus is there. They can't find engineers for love of money. They just can't find them. So they're now training their own. Network Rail, I think, is creating its own college in Sheffield, I think, or somewhere like that. And their application for apprenticeship for Network Rail is huge. So for me, and I know it's different from if you're an individual company, but there's something for me about us retaining them within the NHS, but allowing all that movement around the NHS.
Yeah, but when it comes to the marketplace and the cost, and also the value and the premium that's now being put on some of these jobs, it's all very well these companies training them, but how long are they going to survive in that company before they're poached?
Can I jump in? I'm just going to jump in with a quote that I can't remember, unfortunately, who said it, but CEO talking to the CFO says, "What happens if we train all these people and they leave?"
Yeah.
And the CEO says, "What if we don't train them and they stay?"
And the answer is?
Just train them.
And take the risk.
Take the risk.
This from Saurav Jaiswal. What are the opportunities for individual and organizations in this new or augmented economy? That question's still coming through after your presentations. What are the real opportunities for individuals and organizations here? Heather.
Can you repeat it again? I'm sorry.
What are the opportunities for individuals and organizations in this new augmented economy?
Well, it's flipping education and learning development from being something. It's sort of like the old adage that customer service is not a department, it's everybody's business. Learning and development is not a department, it's everybody's business. If you look back at those top 5 companies, they win by learning. They win by learning faster. Learning is a social act, and it needs to be everybody's business. So they need to just shift their mindset around that, I think.
Patrick?
Yep. I would 100% agree with everything Heather said. I think, I feel like I'm almost repeating myself, but just like learning becoming part of your culture, learning and development creating space for it, creating a world in which learning is okay, and talking about, what skills you want to develop and where you want to go in your career is okay, is a way that that the companies can adapt, as well as the individuals can feel as if they're being invested in.
learning support at the NHS, we know that if a training environment is good, we know patient safety will be better. We know that actually people will have a better experience. So, you know, the NHS isn't in any way perfect at this, but actually, generally, it is a very learning environment. And in some ways, it's slightly easier for the NHS, because when people move around, they come with very clear competencies, because we have nationally set competencies. So when we take a mid-level surgeon in specialty X, when they come over here, we know what they can do already, because that's already been sorted out. So in some ways, that's easier for us.
As AI machine learning grows, using data from people to learn, how do you keep trust and human rights at the heart of technology? I recently interviewed the president of Baidu in a conference in Korea, and he said his job is to make sure the engineers just produce the great stuff, not think about the responsibility of it. Heather?
Well, I think we've seen this, that ethics is becoming, I don't know if it's trending on Twitter, I mean, trending on LinkedIn yet, but it's becoming the hottest thing, because if you code something to do something, who's responsible if somebody dies, if somebody makes a mistake, or there's a racial judgment, or a gender judgment, or a socioeconomic judgment? So I think we need to take a return to looking at ethics in technology, and how we use technology, but also how we make technology work for us and work for us in the right way.
Is that something that really hangs over everything you're analyzing?
Yeah, I think so.
Whose responsibility will that be?
I think collectively it's ours, saying this is not okay. These data breaches are not okay. That was it Equifax had a data breach and they didn't tell people. Somebody else had data stolen. They paid them off and didn't tell people. I think we're going to have to look at policy situations where we just say this is not okay.
Patrick.
Yeah, and again, I think this is my personal opinion. Really, at the end of the day, like you said, it comes down to the individuals themselves as well as the corporate. It's all of our responsibility. I think slowing down, and yes, we want to build flying cars like the Jetsons, but at the end of the day, like understanding kind of, you know, how could this affect humans, and making sure that we're designing applications and paradigms and things that we're doing with technology with humans in mind and with human rights in mind.
And a particular one on this, just coming for you, Alan, on this one. I don't know the names of everyone who's sending all these in. How are you able to ensure healthcare professionals are acquiring the skills to properly manage and operate a machine? Digital e-learning lacks the simulation possibility and skills-based learning validation.
So, so you can of course have simulation in e-learning, just so we're clear, because there's a whole range of simulation. But you know, if you look at technology-enhanced learning in the NHS, 90% of it is made up of e-learning and simulation. And simulation is now moving more from the really expensive simulation centres that cost multi-million pounds to what we call in situ simulation. So actually simulation by the bedside, and that can be done, you know, for £10, £100, £1,000. It can be done for all sorts of prices. So simulation is really, really important. I'm not of the view that e-learning can only do the knowledge component. It can do more. It absolutely can do more, but it requires clever design. So we have national standards built into all of this. We have national standards for faculty, and all of that helps keep the standards up.
A very profound question, given the kind of assumptions that are made about the kind of lingo and phrases you've all been using. This from Robert Jan Simons. Question, what are the skills needed for deep learning?
What are the skills needed for deep learning? That's a very good question.
Have you got a good answer?
I don't have a good answer because I don't know how to do deep learning. My team actually doesn't really specialize in that. There's some very heavy technology skills when you think about algorithmic design and computer programming. I think we get back to the ethics piece that we just mentioned, where it's understanding how your programs are affecting individuals and making sure that, you know, you're not necessarily using personal information, things like that. There's the communication piece, understanding what the business problem is. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that one, but hopefully that's at least somewhat in the right direction. So I think it's a combination.
I'm going to take that question and spin it a little bit. So I think what you're asking about, are you talking about deep learning technology, or are you talking about deep learning in humans? How do humans need to learn?
Well, it says the skills of deep learning. That's the question.
All right, I'm going to pivot a little bit.
You interpret it.
I'm going to interpret it, yeah. So I think there was some fantastic work done by the Institute of the Future out in Palo Alto, and they've identified 10 skills of the future. I can never name them all, but I'll name some of them. So things like virtual collaboration, social emotional intelligence, working, computational thinking, design mindset. These are skills that will cut across any industry that you work in. And I think that needs to be the new foundational literacy in all of our universities, because it becomes, I also have another version of what I call the Agile mindset, but it becomes the foundation that allows you to acquire new knowledge and navigate in this new world with uniquely human skills and complementing technology.
Let me drill down further, because there are a couple of questions here which build on that. What types of skills do workers need to have to thrive and survive in this workplace of the future? And what mindset behavior is needed from individuals, students, workers to succeed?
Do you want me to continue? Okay, so learning agility is one of them. Korn Ferry is the world's largest executive search firm. They've identified learning agility as having 5 dimensions: people agility, change agility, mental agility, results agility, and self-awareness. I think that's a pretty good foundation in terms of the mindset you need. And then again, the skill sets from the Institute for the Future of Work, I think, is pretty spot on. There's actually somebody here, and I'm doing some work with them, full disclosure. There's a Future Skills booth here that is creating online videos that will help people in 1-hour increments and 3 20-minute lessons sort of understand what these skills are as sort of a first layer of navigation. I think that's a pretty good starting point.
Alan Patrick?
For me, the simple skill of actually knowing what's rubbish and what's not, that ability to critically think about,
but do you think,
so much
do you think
out
that comes easily to a lot of the next generation?
I don't, because I think we assume that all the generation coming through are very digitally, you know what I'm trying to say. I hope you know what I'm trying to say.
15 all.
Yes. So no, I don't think they are, actually, because I don't think there's the skill to realize that, you know, when you're on Facebook, actually, and you'll know far more about this, but actually, by virtue of your choices, everything that comes in front of you is absolutely biased by your choices. And I'm, you know, one of my kids, I'll go to school here, and now they do all their homework by actually just searching online. And one of the things I'm trying to teach them is not just to pick the first thing that comes up there, that they think, actually, because it says it here and it's got a nice BBC thing in the corner, that it's fact. Because actually, a lot of the time, it's an opinion and not fact.
Right, and there's an application in Wall Street Journal. You can Google blue feed, red feed, and it's U.S. based, but I'm sure you can understand it by just looking at it. It looks at what your Facebook feed would look like if you vote blue, Democrat, or you vote red, Republican, and the different types of fake news and the different types of bias that comes up. So if you get all your news from Facebook, which an alarming number of people do, you're getting a very biased slant on the news, and it's scary.
And I just think, to add one more piece, similar to the Korn Ferry paradigm, is the idea of a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. It comes a lot back to what we've been talking today about lifelong learning, which is just, rather than thinking that, okay, I'm going to have a set of skills, I'm going to then apply them, and that's it. The idea being that, like, you constantly want to evolve, and shifting your mindset to that, in which I want to grow. I want to continuously grow. You know, yes, I may be a data scientist at LinkedIn, but I know that I don't know much about artificial intelligence and deep learning, and just understanding that you don't know everything, and you can continue to grow.
We're almost at the end, and we're in a kind of takeoff mode here, but we're talking about a workplace. How much have we now got to the point where we shouldn't be talking about jobs, but work and a different kind of way of earning money? It's a question which has been coming up for many years, but are we crossing that Rubicon now into a completely new understanding of what is needed to earn money? So, Heather, you're nodding.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that we're going to stop saying, when you meet someone at a cocktail party, so what do you do? Because the answer to that is a title and a company and maybe an area of expertise. And when you think about your whole life, it may be the least interesting thing about you. It's the most difficult question I always have to answer, because my job doesn't fit neatly in any of those 3 things. So I think work is self-expression. So I think asking those questions in a different way, I think we are moving in that direction.
And I think, just to kind of continue the conversation, is just, jobs are essentially a group of skills. It's a cluster of skills. And really, at the end of the day, when we think about the jobs of the future, we think about the gig economy and the idea of contract work, and how much that's picking up, especially over in the States and even here as well in Europe. Just the idea that you are essentially just a group of skills, yourself and the skills that you represent. And maybe it is your expertise. It's not necessarily what your title is.
In the NHS, we've stopped talking about jobs. We talk about lifelong careers all the time, because of the recognition that actually you will have multiple jobs within that time frame. And I think there is something else for us, and it's probably particular to very regulated professions that we work in. There's something about recognizing all those extra skills you pick up that you may not pick up in an official capacity, but you're still picking them up, and they're still as valuable. And there's a lot of work going on, albeit very slow, about how do we take that into account. So if somebody steps out of a training post and works for 2 years as what we call a staff associate specialist, so they're not training. Actually, why wouldn't we take those 3 years into account if they come back into training, for example?
Literally a couple of minutes. So let me just ask you, I suspect, well, there are 400, 300 people in this room and others watching probably elsewhere and listening. Many will say, oh, should I have got up this early on a Friday morning to listen to this? What the hell do I do? Am I intimidated? Am I overwhelmed? Or am I energized? And many, I think, will probably feel intimidated as much by the enormity of what has to be done. As a very senior figure told our Thinking the Unthinkable project, it's like trying to eat an elephant in one mouthful because of the enormity of what's happening. How do they handle it? Heather?
The first is digest this, acknowledge that it's happening, and start figuring out what's your purpose. Stop defining yourself by what you do, which is the application of your skills and knowledge right now. What's your purpose? What do you like to do? How do you learn? How do you express yourself so that, you may be doing it today in your job or you may not be. But how you're going to navigate is really going to be based upon that internal drive with you.
And I think just to add on to that, I agree with 100%, just all of that. But as I mentioned before, in every one of these inflection points in a different industrial revolution, so to speak, we've come out better, and it's been a positive change for humanity. And personally, I don't see why this one cannot be any different.
And if there are deniers out there, I'm not asking them to put their hands up, but if there are those who are kind of completely in denial, how do they handle this?
It's a great question.
Heather?
Well, they tried smashing the textile looms, didn't they? That didn't work. So it's coming. It's coming, and it's going to be better for us if we're aware and we prepare for it and we position ourselves for it. It's in the end, it's serving humanity. That's how it's supposed to work.
And we haven't yet talked about all the people that Alan's NHS is going to keep alive until they're 90, and the kind of work that they're going to be doing. That's for another session probably. But Alan, again, the intimidation and the kind of, hell, what do I do about this?
To be frank, tough. It's going to happen, and you're just going to have to get on board. My advice, I'm very lucky. I've enjoyed every job I've done in my life. Do the stuff you love. Try and find stuff you love doing, because it makes the learning easier. It just makes everything easier.
You may need a stiffer drink than a coffee after this, but can I just tell you that all the presentations are available online. There's a lot of data that's been got over this morning, so thank you enormously for each of the three speakers, and for you, and all the questions I've been able to put to them on your behalf. And this will continue a year from now when you all assemble again. I wonder how we'll be reflecting on the enormity of change that has taken place in the concept of work in this new digital space. Thank you all very much indeed.